the things where it seemed that God was doing something before us and for us. The first is the oneness of mind that we had at Hillcrest Chapel, even though we knew it would cost pretty well everybody there something, with friendships and family divided and so on. The other thing is the acquisition of this piece of land that the church stands on now. It's part of a farm, although this block, a 5-acre block, was the Rototuna School, and the schoolhouse was still standing when we got here. But it happened because the owner was at the lawyers getting funds for her overseas travel, and she was about to go out, and we managed to talk to her with the help of the lawyer, and she signed an agreement to sell the land even though she was heading overseas. So we bought this block, which was the Rototuna School long ago, 100 years ago I suppose, and the schoolhouse was still standing. But to get that, and to we shocked some people by deciding so quickly.
Right.
Instead of having 100 people saying, yeah, we agree with that, this was about 4 or 5 people making a commitment that was to cost for a good many years after.
How long had you been looking for land up to that point?
Well, we hadn't. We'd only just branched, and we were meeting at the Christian school.
Okay.
And Kemp, talked to us all and said, we need to be looking for land now rather than waiting, because at the time things were starting to be developed up this end of town, and so that was just amazing, because we'd looked around. You and Denver and Noel, did you, quite a bit?
Everywhere. We drove everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the fact that they were at the lawyers when Mrs. Meyer was just leaving, and the lawyer actually suggested, why don't you go and talk to Mrs. Meyer before she leaves the building?
Wow.
And it was just before Christmas. It was just before Christmas, so that meant, because we branched in September.
Oh wow, that's soon.
And the lawyer was, closing down for the holidays and so on. Isn't that amazing? God knew we needed this wonderful bit of land.
Yeah, and the lawyer must have liked us. We'd actually hadn't been involved in church building or church politics and so on. We'd been overseas for the previous 20 years, so it was very new stuff. So we didn't know what the rules were, which not a bad thing completely. But I think that one of the reasons why we had this unanimity was the talking and praying together. We talked to everybody. We had church meetings. We finally even had a vote or show of hands, and we probably heard the famous sign up on one of the window of the childcare room. That's not the room, is it? Name of it.
Yeah, the creche.
Where people could say, we want to go. We not sure, but we might go. In the middle, we simply don't know. And on the other side, the opposite. And people could put their name up and change it as often as they liked. But there was this was all of us. This was not the leadership project. It was the church's project.
Yeah.
Because the leaders, it came as a result of being full after a couple of years in the extended building. And so the elders talked to the church and said, we've got these options. We want you to vote on. We actually had a vote. We do nothing, We go to 2 services, or we decide to have 2 churches meeting in the same building, or we sell and go and get something bigger, or we branch. And I think it was 98% of the people voted to branch, even though we didn't really know what that was going to mean.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was very united.
That was a God thing, to get 98% of people in the Brethren Church agreeing.
But also what strikes me in what you shared there was there was not one option that was being put forward by the leadership that was heavily weighted. It didn't sound to me like you were saying we feel committed and convicted that we need to branch and plant. You were actually saying we don't know what we should do, and we're hoping for the community to discern that.
Yeah.
Fascinating,
Right.
and it worked.
Yeah,
Yes.
it did.
Interesting.
Yeah. One was expectation,
Right.
something is happening here.
Uh-huh.
At the same time, there was a certain amount of frustration because nothing seemed to happen. We didn't know where we were going to go. And you looked at several places, didn't you?
I visited 100 different places to see if we could find a place for a church. But with the group that size, which involved children from, not many high school children, they all stayed, but we needed a building where you could meet, a place where the children could meet, and the creche, and also where we could have lunches or cups of tea. So I visited over 100 places, and we finally, the Christian school said that we could go there. We were only there for three months,
Okay.
and then they divided, and so they needed the room to divide up for classrooms. So one of our friends, Jocelyn Haimona, who was with the branch, she said, "Anne, have you been to the rugby club?" Well, that was the one place in Enderley. It's the one place I hadn't been to ask. So I went along there, and they said, "Oh yes, we don't have anybody else meeting here." So that's
Except we have a happy hour on Saturday night.
So we went to the rugby club, and I think the way we were called Northside at that time. The way Northside people responded, I mean, it was just amazing. I wrote down a joyful acceptance of challenges. And so, like, people would come along and clean it up a bit before we had church, and that whole area.
Wipe the beer off the seats.
And we had places that we had to meet in the 2 squash courts with the children. Man, it was cold, but it was just the people. They accepted that there were difficulties, but they just they were
That was it, and that's what they'd signed up for.
And then, of course, when the people at the rugby club, they gave us a week's notice. They said, "We're going to be tearing down, taking out the ceiling. I think it had asbestos in it, and we're going to be doing all this work. You can't meet here anymore." And I'd already been round everywhere in Hamilton, but Fairfield College must have got in touch with me because I'd been there before, but there was a church meeting, and they talked to me and said, "Oh, the church that was meeting in our hall is not meeting anymore. Are you interested?" And I straight away went there, and that's how we got to go to Fairfield College.
So she made executive decisions.
Yes.
Well,
Based on necessity.
based on necessity. And so we were there for 3 years before we got our own building.
Yeah.
And of course, the high school's really good because there's rooms for children, and whenever we moved, everybody turned up and packed up stuff and loaded it up and took it wherever we were going.
Yeah, we did. Some people left
It was
because
too
of the
hard,
change. It was too
but
hard.
most people didn't.
Yep.
And we got a few new people, but not a lot. But it was, anyway.
I mean, I think in today's leadership culture, you'd have been castigated for not having a decent strategy before you even started.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like you really just went, and this would be a shall we say, worldly term, went by the seat of your pants.
Yep.
But a Christian term for that would be
Faith.
faith,
Yeah.
following the Lord's will.
Yes.
Go and I'll show you the land.
Yes. I wish we could say that we had all those biblical promises to support us, but really we just went to do what's practical. Find a place. We thought we knew a lot about branching from Chapel Hill, right? Actually, we didn't, and it wasn't the same easy flow of ideas and commitment.
You have to involve everybody.
You have to involve all the people, and we'd learnt that in the Philippine context because our mission was very democratic. We talked about everything and argued and had annual conferences and so on. And the other was not only that we had a vision, but that we involved everybody in it. And we did that better at Hillcrest than we did later at Chapel Hill.
Can you give any reasons why you might think that would be the case?
One of the main things we learnt from the second branch was we did not have leaders. Well, when I say we had leaders, but like when we branched from Hillcrest, we left 2 staff members there and us 2 staff went. So we were seen as the leaders and we were employed.
And half the elders.
And half the elders came. But the thing is that we had, in that first branch, we were both working full time to make sure the branch worked right. And I think that had quite a lot to do with what you'd call the success of it. But when we branched the next time, we had group leaders, which was fine, but we didn't have anybody employed that would spend the time. And you actually, as you know, you've got to have time to interact with people and listen to them and all that sort of stuff.
Well, 2 things. One was leaving the first house we'd ever built at Tamaheri before it was fashionable, but it was nice. So you couldn't get any further away from here than Tamaheri. So that we had to leave that house, which we absolutely loved. It was on the edge of a steep bank looking down towards a stream. It was nice. And the other thing, we left all our family. And we've never been the same church as them since. So that, grandchildren growing up at the time, I think for Anne particularly, but for me too, that was, you weren't there for their events and, their christening and all those things.
Christening. I was reading my diary the other day to try and find out some of the dates, and I did not go back to Hillcrest Chapel, hardly at all, after we branched. But I read in my diary that there was one time I went there because Kemp was speaking, and I felt really, not hard done by, but it was warm because it was in winter. Everything was convenient, everything was there.
Good kitchen,
and I felt really sorry for myself. I think at the time we were meeting at the rugby club, I remember at Fairfield College. It was so cold, we're in this great big hall and we had this huge noisy gas heater, and when it was on you couldn't hear anything else. But anyway,
it had a blower. It roared.
But I sort of felt because I was the administrator at Hillcrest Chapel, so I knew everything that was going on. I found it really hard not knowing what was happening at Hillcrest Chapel.
Wow.
I found that quite hard.
And I thought you were unreasonable.
Yeah.
And that didn't help.
Yeah.
And like when we would meet as a family, we used to always talk about what was happening at Hillcrest, but when we met as a family, after the branch, they were sort of interested in what we were doing, but it wasn't the same.
So you lost that common ground.
Yeah,
those are both really personal. When you talk about what is hardest in the branch, they were both really personal examples.
Yeah, because it was offset by the lure of the chase.
And
there was that
you
feeling.
were on an adventure at last.
Yeah, we were, and we thrived on that. We'd done it in the Philippines. We lived in one of the remotest places in the world, and we came here and doing this other adventurous thing that sat well with us.
Does it strike you that those 2 things are necessary? The sense of I'm going to have to give something up that I treasure in order to pursue something else that I treasure even more. Is there a sense in that for you?
Yeah, I think there is.
I think for the actual branch, it was the collective group, wasn't it, really? You'd name, I've got a list of all the, if you wanted, I've got a list of all the names who branched, people who left Hillcrest Chapel. Yeah.
Right, keep those records.
Yeah, kept those records. So it was amazing.
So yeah, I thought about this question. The significant thing was not so much the individuals that stood out, it's the number of people who willingly became part of a group and would let the group decide and so on. So there's very little kickback from individuals saying, oh,
Right.
no, we'd never do that. None of that sort of mood.
Right.
If we talked about it and it seemed that the other people in the group agreed, then people would say, okay.
Yeah.
So that was all the way through. Choosing this piece of land, where we're going to build it, what kind of a building, how much, all those things. The unanimity after discussion was considerable. There was a spirit of adventure.
Yes.
I think that looking back, there's almost an appetite for doing things that hadn't been done before.
Right.
Yeah. So that stood us in good stead in the days when we were shivering in uncomfortable premises or so on. This feeling, we were this God all the way through it. You felt God was He was involved in this.
Asking a difficult question.
Yeah.
Would it have felt more like God was involved if it had gone easy? If you hadn't had to shiver in the cold, if you'd been gifted out of the blue, a purpose-built, functional building you could have stepped into and never had to do anything with.
Oh, I'm sure it shaped us.
Yeah.
I'm sure that discomfort, it also makes you more reasonable about the comforts that you must have, and almost austerity. Like it was a struggle to get a kitchen as big as we got at Chapel Hill, because we'd already got used to just managing, one plug into the wall, boil the jug.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think that for me, the gifts that I discovered when we did network, I was just having a ball, because one of the things I loved to do was create order out of chaos. One of the things that an administrator does, apparently. And when there was the challenge, a new place, so where are we going to have the children? Where are the children going to meet? And I would find ways of fixing it and doing it, and I just loved that.
Still do.
The challenge. I just love to meet a challenge, and so when we were going to branch again from Chapel Hill, one of our granddaughters said to me, "Gran," though she was still at Hillcrest, "I hear you're branching again, and I hear you're going with the new branch." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Isn't it time you settled down?" Well, we're not those sort of people, I guess. So I guess that's one of the God things, that God had us with our gifts. Kemp's very wise and he's a good preacher and all that he had us there at Hillcrest Chapel ready for this branch. Yeah. So that was
the standout for me is Hillcrest, the people there that let their stars,
let my people go.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. They were amazing, and many of them, some of them are dead now, of course, but many of them are still interested in how we're doing up our end of town.
Interesting.
And that's not routine. Other churches in Hamilton, different denominations, have struggled. If you're doing, say, Calvin church, all right, let's say, and you're going to split off, you quite often it isn't actually a split; it's a division. We never had this feeling that it
We
was
were a branch, not
we
a
were a
split.
branch, not
Yeah.
not a split,
Yeah.
which is a very different thing. A branch supposes life from the same source.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, there's a reason why I'm talking to you both, because and you've hesitated to say it, but it's obvious that you two are very significant in the fact that both branches happened and have flourished.
Mm.
So your names will go down in history, including, there's a reason why people were called together to discuss together. That doesn't happen without someone leading that process.
That's true.
It doesn't
Right.
happen in a
That
vacuum.
is true.
People will not naturally want to sit down and argue together in order to achieve
Just
a
for
call.
fun. No.
Just for fun, no.
No.
We quit that process as soon as we can, and often too quickly.
Yep.
So you have held their feet to the fire long enough to get a good outcome.
Yeah, it's probably true. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the other things that we wanted to say too was, in our middle years. I mean, or in our.
What are they?
I think we're in our 50s when we've settled when we were working at Hillcrest Chapel, and then to be involved in this wonderful adventure of planting a new church. It was such a privilege. We just think, oh man, God has been so good to us, and there were real difficulties. There were more difficulties in our second branch, and because by then we were back involved in translation anyway. But even so, have this privilege of being involved in one of God's ventures, establishing these churches. Yeah, and of course at the time we had no idea that the north of Hamilton was going to develop like it has.
I mean, this road here was the end of the world.
Yeah.
And Thomas Road, there were old cars lying in the ditch. They lay there for years. I think for me, it's hard to pick out any one thing. But one is I like adventure. I don't mean physical. Physical adventure is a byproduct. Like when we went to work with a tribal group in the deep south of the Philippines, in a Muslim world, that was, I've lost my train of thought.
You said venture there.
Oh yeah, there were physical dangers being there, and it was not a good place to have a wife and children who were sometimes left just with local people to help because I was off on a survey trip or an outreach trip of some sort. I didn't mind risk, and I've kind of got over it now. But and I think that willingness to take risk, which Anne shared, that cost her more, that troubled some people. They wanted the moves, the decisions to be safer. So.
But it was something that God had given you that
Yes.
was in God's hands doing all sorts of things.
Yeah, I was area director for Wycliffe Bible Translators in the Pacific for 5 years, nearly 6 years, and went to all sorts of places. And again, that appealed to my willingness to go to places where I was not known, didn't know what would happen, sleeping in some pretty gross places, but it's part of what made part of what I was, I think.
What do you think? What was the adventure you thought you were on? Because you're right. There's a lot of people who take the byproduct and make it everything. The coast to coast challenges. I mean, there's a huge amount of emphasis on the physical challenge. You called it a byproduct. Byproduct of what?
It's a byproduct of commitment to to God's mission in the world. I think that's the underlying thing. Like going to argue with the bishops in the Solomon Islands, some Catholic and Anglican bishops who did not want another organisation going. Was the sense that even though they made it difficult for us, they, from first making it difficult, being unwelcoming, to accepting what we had to say, to becoming enthusiastic about the possibility of people coming to help their people translate their language into the scriptures. So it's this kind of controlled adventure, I suppose. But
Yeah, I think for my faith journey, I think it's the way God has made me, always wanting to know what God wants, and then obeying. And even now, that's sort of a theme that goes through. What is God wanting me to do right now? Listening to Him, and then when I'm aware of His direction, then obeying. And I think one of the things that I'm quite a contented person, and I often think of that verse, or is it a verse? Godliness with contentment is great gain. And I think to be to listen to God, to do what He wants, and then to be content with what He sends your way. I mean, and it's not always easy, but it's what He wants. So
there are some limits to your contentment.
Yeah, when you see chaos, you're not content.
Yeah.
Beat this into submission.
that's right.
That becomes part of the call of God, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't want to go to the movies as often as you do.
Oh, dear. I think one of my main disappointments in all this is reaching people for Christ, and I don't. We've done things in the community, and we've sought out people and befriended people and run alpha courses and done all that, but I've always have this evangelism, that reaching people for Jesus, that hasn't been fulfilled in the way I hoped, and I don't understand the way God is at work, but the work of His Spirit amongst people I suppose that's been a sort of a disappointment. Haven't
Plenty of action, plenty of effort, very little result.
Of actual people come. I mean, there have been people who've come to faith, but
you're constantly getting to know people in the hope that it might lead to something.
I think it was
the Powells.
Yeah, but I think an example of it, when in our second term in the Philippines, the mission got a 2-engine plane, so it was able to travel over wide distances of water. So it meant that we could actually fly just about all the way to the village instead of taking 3 or 4 days to get there. And we would fly over these islands, and I could see these villages, these Sama villages, because they lived over the water, and you could see them. And I'd say
they lived on sand spits.
Yeah. How can we reach these people for Christ? And even in our village, when would talk to the local people about Jesus, very few of them became believers. And Kemp said, "Anne, we've been called to translate the scriptures for these people." And it wasn't until many years later, when we started going back to the Philippines again, and before that, we heard about how one man, he got Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts that we'd print books as we translated them, sort of temporary, and he got a copy of that, and he taught himself to read. His name was Aljari. He taught himself to read. He became a follower of Jesus, and he was an amazing evangelist. And he's one of the main ones that went and taught his people how to become followers of Jesus.
Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The story of a nation's own language speakers.
That's right.
Let the translation itself.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
let
right.
the people spread it.
Yep. That's
story
right.
of Luke.
That's right.
Tarore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
That's
So who are the local people in New Zealand?
Well, that was where I was going to land it. So here we are in New Zealand. New Zealanders talking to New Zealanders, and they seem to be deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to
No,
that either.
maybe our main is to people who are new to New Zealand. Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
yeah, it is.
But
Yeah.
New Zealanders are deaf to it. I mean, we run this cafe at church
Yes.
twice a month for elderly people, and we tell them about Jesus. And here these people coming to the end of their life. Why aren't they thinking about what's going to? But no, it's like this, sort of like this. What does it come over our?
Doesn't feel like it's news anymore. Maybe it does in the Philippines when someone's going, "Hey, I've just discovered this incredible thing."
Yeah,
People are like, we know, but Jesus, that's old.
yeah.
We're moving forward.
Yeah, we
It's
don't
not
know.
news.
Yeah.
Mm.
We've got
I
over
don't know.
that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Inoculated against Jesus.
Yeah.
COVID-19 and Jesus is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
But then we still believe God's at work, and we see Him at work in people's lives. And
Yeah. Amen.
I think I'll go and put the kettle on, eh?